The searing twin suns of Agrava 9 beat down on the exposed cargo bay, where they had left her to die. Naira Azarian's silver scales, once gleaming with the royal luster of the Zalith dynasty, now dulled with the red dust that seemed to coat everything on this forsaken colony planet. She had been Princess Naira, just 6 planetary rotations ago. Now she was nothing. Cargo. Waste. A biological failure left to be reclaimed by the elements. The pain in her abdomen had subsided. At least. The ceremonial extraction had been performed without anesthetic, a final punishment for her body's betrayal. Zalith royalty were expected to pass the ceremony of continuance by their 3rd decade. She had failed. Her reproductive system had rejected the royal genetic material, a disgrace so profound that her name would be struck from the royal archives by morning. Defective. The royal geneticist had pronounced with clinical detachment. The lineage cannot be compromised. Even her father, Emperor Visage, had turned away as the guards dragged her to the transport vessel. Not a word of protest, not a flicker of paternal affection. Just the cold, reptilian stare that had made the 12 systems of the Zalith Dominion tremble for generations. The thirst was becoming unbearable. Naira's secondary eyelids fluttered rapidly, trying to conserve moisture. She estimated she had perhaps 1 more solar cycle before dehydration would render her unconscious. After that, it would be a mercy when death finally came. A sound broke through her delirium, the mechanical whine of a land vehicle approaching. Probably scavengers coming to strip the abandoned cargo vessel. They might not even notice her, half buried in the shadows of the hold. The sound grew louder, then cut off abruptly. Footsteps crunched on the red gravel, heavy boots. Not the light step of her people. "Hello? Anyone still alive in there?" The voice was deep, resonant in a way Zalith voices never were. Human. One of the agricultural settlers who had made Agrava 9 their home despite its harsh conditions. Naira remained silent. What was the point? Death by exposure or death at the hands of a human? Neither held much appeal, but at least the former preserved what little dignity she had left. The human silhouette appeared at the cargo bay entrance, backlit by the merciless suns. Tall, broad-shouldered, lacking the elegant lines of Zalith physiology. He carried something in his hands. A weapon, perhaps. "I saw the royal insignia on this transport from my fields. Came to check if there were any parts worth salvaging." The figure moved closer, and Naira could now see it was not a weapon he carried, but a canteen. Didn't expect to find anyone alive. The human knelt beside her, close enough that she could smell the earthy scent of him, soil and sweat, and something unfamiliar yet not unpleasant. He held out the canteen. "Can you drink? You look like you need it." Pride dictated she refuse. Royal protocol forbade accepting sustenance from lesser species. But Naira was no longer royal, was she? And her body's thirst overwhelmed all cultural conditioning. She reached for the canteen with trembling hands, her silver-scaled fingers brushing against his calloused skin. The water was warm and tasted of minerals, but it was the sweetest thing she had ever consumed. "Thank you," she managed, her voice raspy from disuse. The human nodded, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Not disgust or fear, as she might have expected, but simple curiosity. "You're a long way from the capital worlds," he observed. "And they left you here to die. Must have been something serious." Naira looked away. "I failed my purpose." "Which was?" "To continue the royal lineage. I am defective." The human was quiet for a moment, digesting this information. Then he stood, brushing red dust from his worn coveralls. "Well, defective or not, you won't last another day out here." He extended a hand toward her. "I'm Darren Holt. I've got a farm about 5 kilometers east. Nothing fancy, but there's shelter, food, and more water." Naira stared at the offered hand. "Why would you help me?" Darren shrugged. Because you're alive and don't want to be dead? I don't need a better reason than that. Such simplicity of thought, such humanity. It was strangely compelling. I have nothing to offer in return, she said, a final warning. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Didn't ask for anything, did I? His hand remained extended. You can come or stay. Your choice. First real one you've had in a while. I'm guessing. Choice. The concept was so foreign it almost didn't translate properly in her mind. In the royal household, every moment of her life had been predetermined. Meals, education, ceremonies, duties, all prescribed by tradition and protocol. Even her death had been decided for her. Yet here was this human, this farmer, offering her something no one in her 28 cycles of life ever had, a decision that was truly hers to make. Nara reached up and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. You got a name? He asked as he helped her to her feet. Nara. She hesitated, then added, just Nara. Her family name no longer belonged to her. All right, just Nara. There was that slight smile again. Let's get you somewhere safe. As he guided her toward his rugged vehicle, she glanced back at the cargo hold that was to have been her tomb. For the first time since the ceremony, a flicker of something other than despair kindled within her. Not hope, precisely. She was too well trained to indulge in such an emotional luxury. But perhaps its distant cousin, possibility. The sun was setting by the time they reached Darren's farm, casting long shadows across fields of sturdy, rust-colored plants that seemed to thrive in the harsh, Agriven soil. The farmhouse itself was modest but solid, built of local stone with a metal roof that gleamed dully in the fading light. It's not much, Darren said as he helped her from the vehicle, his steadying hand gentle on her elbow. But it's home. Home. Another concept Nara was struggling to redefine. The crystal spires and floating gardens of the imperial palace had never felt like home so much as a beautiful cage. This humble structure before her seemed to radiate something altogether different, a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with obligation or bloodline. The door swung open before they reached it, and two small humans burst forth, their voices high and excited. Dad, you're late for dinner. We were... The taller child, a boy with hair the color of Agriven wheat, stopped short when he spotted Nara. His eyes widened to perfect circles. Whoa! The smaller one, a girl with dark curls and skin a shade deeper than her brother's, peeked around from behind him. Is she from the stars? She whispered loudly. This is Nara, Darren said simply. She needed a place to stay. Nara, these are my children, Micah and Rosie. Nara had never interacted with human children before. Royal protocol limited contact with humans to formal diplomatic events, and children were never present at such functions. She stood awkwardly, unsure of the proper greeting. Your scales are pretty, Rosie said, stepping closer with the fearless curiosity of the very young. They look like the fish in the pond, but silver. Thank you, Naira replied, the formality of her upbringing making even those simple words sound stiff to her ears. Are you going to live with us now? Micah asked, his head tilted in assessment. Before Nara could formulate a response to this unexpectedly complex question, Darren intervened. Naira's going to stay for a while until she gets better. She's had a rough journey. He ushered them all inside. Now, what about that dinner you mentioned? I'm starving. The interior of the farmhouse was as modest as its exterior, clean but lived in, with furniture that showed signs of wear and care in equal measure. The main room served multiple functions: kitchen, dining area, and gathering space, with doors leading off to what Nara presumed were sleeping quarters. There was none of the specialized segregation of space she was accustomed to in the palace, where rooms existed for the sole purpose of morning reflection or afternoon correspondence or seasonal wardrobe storage. This was a place where life happened in its entirety, not parceled out into rigid compartments. The dinner was simple, a hearty stew of local vegetables and protein, served with rough bread, still warm from baking. Nara watched carefully as the humans ate, trying to mimic their use of utensils. In the palace, she had been fed the precisely calculated nutrition her royal metabolism required, always through the ceremonial crystal straws that had been used by the Zalith for millennia. Using a spoon was a novel experience. "You don't eat much," Rosie observed as Nara took small, cautious bites. "Zalith metabolism is different from ours," Darren explained. "They need less food but more water." He pushed a large glass toward Nara. "Drink up. You're still dehydrated." Nara wondered at his knowledge. Most humans knew little about Zalith physiology beyond the obvious external differences. "How do you know this?" she asked. Darren's expression shifted slightly, a shadow passing behind his eyes. "My late wife was a xenobiologist, studied comparative biology of sentient species, came to Agrava 9 for research, stayed for—" He glanced at his children with a sad smile. "Other reasons. Dad met Mom here," Micah explained importantly. "She was super smart and knew everything about aliens. She died when Rosie was a baby." "I'm sorry," Naira said, the human phrase of condolence feeling strange on her tongue. Darren nodded acknowledgement. "It was 5 years ago. Cancer. Even with modern medicine, some things still get you in the end. 5 years. The twins appeared to be about 7 or 8 standard years old, which meant Darren had been raising them alone for most of their lives. The concept was foreign to Naira. Royal children were raised by specialized caretakers, not their genetic contributors. She had seen her father perhaps once a month during her formative years, and those encounters had been formal affairs with strict protocols. The easy affection between Darren and his children, the way Rosie leaned against his arm as she ate, the unconscious ruffling of Micah's hair as Darren passed his chair, was something entirely outside her experience. After dinner, Darren showed her to a small room at the back of the house. "You can sleep here. Bathrooms across the hall. We've got running water, hot and cold. One of the perks of having an underground spring on the property." The room was simple but clean, containing a bed, a small chest of drawers, and a chair by the window. Nothing like the vast royal chambers with their anti-gravity sleep platforms and atmospheric control systems tailored to her individual biorhythms. Yet something about the modest space felt welcoming in a way her palace quarters never had. "Thank you," she said again, the words still awkward but perhaps a fraction less formal than before. Darren lingered in the doorway. "The kids will have questions. They're curious about everything, especially people who are different from them. Feel free to not answer if they get too personal." Naira nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what would constitute too personal by human standards. Royal protocol dictated that any inquiry about a member of the dynasty was, by definition, an impertinence. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. The question had been gnawing at her since he'd first offered his hand in the abandoned cargo hold. Darren considered for a moment. "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure." He leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe because out here, we all need help sometimes. The planet's not exactly hospitable. Or maybe—" He paused, seemed to reconsider his words. "Maybe because no one deserves to be thrown away like they're nothing." With that, he bid her good night and closed the door softly behind him, leaving Naira alone with thoughts that swirled like the dust storms that sometimes swept across Agrava 9's desolate landscapes. No one deserves to be thrown away like they're nothing. Such a simple statement, yet it contradicted everything she had been taught about the natural order of the universe. The Zalith believed that purpose determined value. Those who fulfilled their purpose were worthy. Those who failed were not. It was not cruelty, but cosmic efficiency, the same principle that caused stars to burn out when they had exhausted their fuel. She had failed her purpose. Therefore, Her disposal was not only justified but necessary. That was the logic that had governed her entire existence. Yet, this human, this farmer with his curious children and his modest stone house, seemed to operate under an entirely different set of principles. One where worth wasn't earned through function but simply existed, intrinsic and inalienable. Nara lay on the unfamiliar bed, listening to the soft sounds of the house settling for the night, the murmur of Darren's voice as he read to his children, the creaking of floorboards, the distant hum of machinery that kept the farm functioning through the night. So different from the perpetual silence of the palace, where sound itself was considered an inefficiency to be eliminated. She closed her inner and outer eyelids, surrendering to a sleep deeper than any she had known in her royal chambers, where attendants monitored her constantly for optimal performance. For the first time in her life, no one was watching, no one was measuring, no one was waiting for her to fail. She simply was. Days on Agrava 9 were long, nearly 30 standard hours of sunlight, followed by brief, intense nights. Naira woke to find the house empty and still, sunlight streaming through the simple cloth curtains at her window. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Where were her morning attendants? Why hadn't the atmospheric systems gradually increased illumination to match her circadian rhythm? Then, memory returned. She was no longer Princess Nara Azarian of the royal house of Zalith. She was just Nara, unexpected guest in the home of a human farmer and his children. She rose and made her way to the bathroom Darren had indicated the night before. The facilities were rudimentary compared to the molecular cleansing chambers of the palace, but she managed to decipher their operation. The sensation of water, actual water, not sonic vibrations or sterilizing light, against her scales was startling, but not unpleasant. Dressed again in her ceremonial undergarments, the only clothing she possessed, she ventured into the main room of the house. A note sat on the kitchen table, handwritten on actual paper. Nara, gone to the North Fields with the kids. Help yourself to food. Back for midday meal. Darren. The informality of it struck her. No honorifics, no seals of authentication, no formal permissions or restrictions, just simple information, freely given. She found fruit in a bowl and bread in a covered container. The act of serving herself food felt transgressive, almost rebellious. In the palace, nourishment appeared at precisely calculated intervals, the composition determined by royal nutritionists to optimize her performance of duties. Choice of sustenance was not a privilege extended even to royalty. Yet, here she was, selecting a piece of fruit based on nothing more scientific than its appealing color. After eating, Nara explored the farmhouse. It was larger than it had appeared the previous evening, with several rooms she hadn't seen. One appeared to be Darren's workshop, filled with tools and parts for the machinery that kept the farm operational. Another was clearly an educational space for the children, with books, actual physical books, and creative implements like colored waxes and pigments. Most surprising was a room filled with scientific equipment, much of it sophisticated enough to seem out of place in this rustic setting. Specimen containers, analysis devices, and data terminals shared space with preserved samples of local flora and fauna. This, she realized, must have been where Darren's wife had conducted her research. A photo caught her attention. A woman with dark curls like Rosie's, smiling broadly as she held up some kind of plant specimen. She wore the insignia of the Interstellar Biological Survey on her jacket. Dr. Eliana Holt, according to the name badge visible in the image. Not a mere xenobiologist, then, but a highly qualified researcher from one of the most prestigious scientific organizations in human space. What had brought such a woman to this remote planet? And what had made her stay with a farmer and raise children so far from the centers of human civilization? Before she could ponder these questions further, Nara heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. Through the window, She saw Darren's transport returning, dust billowing behind it in the dry Agravan air. The twins burst into the house first, their energy seemingly undiminished by whatever work they had been doing in the fields. "You're awake!" Rosie exclaimed, as if this were an achievement worthy of celebration. "Dad said we should let you sleep as long as you wanted." "Are you feeling better?" Micah asked, studying her with the same directness his father possessed. "I am less dehydrated," Nara replied carefully. Human concepts of better and worse didn't always align with Zalith physiological states. "Dad's bringing lunch," Rosie informed her, dropping into a chair at the kitchen table. "We've been planting new seedlings all morning. My fingers are all dirty." She held up her hands proudly to display the evidence of her labor. In the palace, such a display would have been met with horror. Cleanliness was next to godliness in Zalith culture. Physical labor was for lesser beings. Yet this child spoke of her dirt-covered hands with pride, as if they were badges of honor, rather than marks of shame. Darren entered, carrying a container that emitted savory aromas. "Hope you're hungry," he said, setting it on the table. "Rosie, wash those hands before you touch any food." The girl complied without complaint, and soon they were seated around the table, sharing a meal of some kind of savory pie filled with vegetables and protein. Again, Naira found herself navigating the unfamiliar territory of communal dining and self-service. "I explored your home," she admitted between careful bites. "I hope that was not an intrusion." "Mikasa is Sukasa," Darren replied with a small shrug. At her blank look, he clarified. "Old Earth saying means make yourself at home." "I saw the research laboratory," Nara continued. "It is unexpected in an agricultural setting." A shadow passed over Darren's face, but he nodded. "Eliana's work. She came here to study the unique biology of Agrava 9, how Earth crops adapted to the soil composition, the native microorganisms, that sort of thing." His expression softened. "She was brilliant. Could have had a position at any research institute in the core worlds, but she loved it here. Said you could learn more from a handful of Agravan soil than from 1,000 simulations in a sterile lab." "She made the dirt talk," Rosie said solemnly, as if quoting a familiar phrase. "That she did," Darren agreed, ruffling his daughter's hair. Nara found herself strangely moved by this glimpse into their shared past. There was pain there, certainly, the loss of a wife and mother, but it was woven into a tapestry of memories that seemed to comfort rather than torment. "What will happen now?" she asked, the question escaping before she could consider its implications. Darren looked at her thoughtfully. "That depends on you, I suppose. You're welcome to stay as long as you need to recover. After that," he spread his hands. "It's a big galaxy." "Can she stay forever?" Rosie asked, eyes wide with sudden hope. "She could help with the flowers. Her fingers are long and good for the delicate parts." "Rosie," Darren admonished gently, "Nara might have her own plans." The concept was so foreign that Nara almost laughed. Plans? When had she ever had plans of her own? Her entire existence had been plotted from the moment of her genesis. Education, duties, ceremonial responsibilities, and ultimately, reproduction to continue the royal line. With her failure at that final, crucial task, the plan had terminated. There was no contingency for a defective royal. "I have no plans," she said simply. Darren nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "Then for now, just focus on getting stronger. Everything else can wait." After the meal, the twins returned to their studies in the education room, and Darren invited Nara to accompany him as he checked on the irrigation systems in the nearby fields. "You don't have to help," he assured her as they walked under the harsh Agravan sun. "But fresh air does everyone good, even royal aliens who've been cooped up in palaces." There was no mockery in his tone, just a gentle teasing that Nara found strangely non-threatening. In the palace, Any reference to her status that wasn't accompanied by the proper honorifics would have been a grave offense. "I know nothing of agriculture," she admitted, as they reached the edge of a field, where row upon row of reddish-green plants stretched toward the horizon. "Not much to know, from your perspective," Darren replied, kneeling to examine an irrigation node. "You put seeds in dirt, add water and sunshine, keep the pests away, and hope for the best. Nature does most of the work." Such simplification would have been considered heresy in the halls of imperial power, where complexity was valued as a sign of sophistication. Yet, as she watched Darren make minor adjustments to the irrigation system, his movements economical and practiced, Naira recognized a different kind of complexity, the accumulated knowledge of someone who worked in harmony with natural systems, rather than trying to control them completely. "What do you grow?" she asked, genuinely curious. "This field is high millet, staple grain crop, adapted for Agravan soil. Over there," he pointed to another field where taller plants swayed in the breeze. "That's pulse bean, high protein, good export crop. And beyond that is my experimental field, where I'm testing some of Eliana's crossbreeds." Pride colored his voice when he spoke of his late wife's work. She believed that with the right adaptations, we could increase yields by 30% without additional resources. Would make a big difference to the colony's self-sufficiency. "You continue her research?" Darren adjusted another irrigation node before answering. "As best I can. I'm no scientist, but I understand the principles. And I've got her notes, her data. Seems wrong to let all that knowledge go to waste." This, too, was a concept foreign to Naira's experience. In the Empire, knowledge was compartmentalized, restricted according to status and function. The idea that a farmer would continue the work of a xenobiologist, crossing boundaries of discipline and social hierarchy, was almost incomprehensible. Yet, here was Darren, moving confidently between worlds, father, farmer, researcher, without apparent concern for the categorical distinctions that would have defined his existence in imperial society. As they continued their circuit of the fields, Naira found herself asking questions about the crops, about the irrigation system, about the colony itself. Each answer revealed a worldview so different from her own that it was like learning a new language, one where the fundamental assumptions about existence were entirely restructured. In the imperial worldview, hierarchy was natural and necessary. In Darren's world, adaptation and cooperation seemed to be the guiding principles. The contrast was simultaneously disorienting and exhilarating. By the time they returned to the farmhouse, the suns were beginning their slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. Naira was surprised to realize that hours had passed without her awareness of time, a strange experience for someone whose life had been regulated by chronomarkers and ceremonial schedules. The twins were in the yard, engaged in some form of play that involved much running and shouting. They paused when they spotted Naira and Darren. "Did you show her the miracle plants?" Micah called out. "Not today," Darren replied. "Maybe tomorrow." "What are miracle plants?" Naira asked as they approached the house. "Mom's special project," Rosie explained, coming to walk beside them. "Plants that can clean bad water and make it good again." "Phytoremediation," Darren clarified. "Eliana was working on strains that could purify water contaminated by mining operations further north. Another of her projects I've been trying to continue." "Can I see them tomorrow?" Naira found herself asking, surprising herself with her interest. Rosie's face lit up. "I'll show you. I help take care of them. They're like regular plants, but super plants because they have special powers." Darren smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm. "Looks like you've got a tour guide." As they entered the house, Naira realized that for the first time since her extraction from the palace, she was looking forward to the next day. It was a small thing, perhaps, but in a life that had been defined by duty rather than desire, it felt like a revelation. That night, after the twins were asleep, Nara sat with Darren on the porch of the farmhouse, watching Agrava 9's 3 moons rise in succession over the eastern hills. The air was cool, but not unpleasant, and the silence between them felt companionable rather than awkward. "May I ask you something?" Nara finally said, breaking the quiet. "Seems fair," Darren replied. "You've answered plenty of Rosie's questions today." "Why did they leave you?" The question had been forming since she'd learned of Eliana's death. "Your people have colonies throughout this sector. Surely there are support systems for widowed parents. Yet you remain here, isolated, continuing work that is not your specialty. Why?" Darren was silent for so long that Nara wondered if she had committed some human social offense. Just as she was about to apologize, he spoke. "After Eliana died, they offered to relocate us. Good schools for the kids. Research position for me at an agricultural station. Practical solution." He gazed up at the moons. "But this was home. The kids were born here. Eliana's buried on the North Ridge, under the jacaranda tree we brought from Earth as a wedding gift to each other." He shrugged, a gesture Nara was beginning to recognize as his way of dismissing complex emotions. Some things matter more than convenience or career advancement. Home, family, belonging. These concepts kept surfacing in her interactions with Darren and his children. They seemed to form the core of their value system in a way that purpose and function never could. "In the Empire," Nara said slowly, "such considerations would be deemed inefficient. Emotional attachment to location or remains is seen as primitive." "And what do you think?" Darren asked, turning to look at her directly. "Now that you're not in the Empire anymore?" The question caught her off guard. What did she think? When had her thoughts ever mattered? "I think," she began, then paused, aware that she was forming an opinion that was truly her own, not one prescribed by imperial doctrine. "I think there is a logic to your choice that imperial efficiency does not account for." Darren's mouth quirked in that small smile she was coming to recognize. High praise, coming from a princess. "I am no longer a princess," she reminded him, more sharply than she'd intended. "Aren't you?" He leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "Seems to me that titles like that are in the blood. They can say you're not royal anymore, but that doesn't change who you are." "You don't understand," Naira insisted. "In my culture, identity is inseparable from function. I failed my function. Therefore, I am no longer who I was." "And who are you now?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. Who was she, if not Princess Nara Azarian? What was her purpose, if not to continue the royal line? What was her value, if not determined by her reproductive capacity? "I don't know," she admitted finally, the words feeling like surrender. Darren nodded, as if this were a perfectly reasonable response. "Fair enough. Not knowing who you are seems like a pretty normal state for someone who's just had their whole life turned upside down." He stood, stretching slightly. "For what it's worth, I think you get to decide the answer to that question now. Not your empire, not your function, you." With that, he bid her good night and went inside, leaving Nara alone with the moons and stars and a question that was simultaneously terrifying and thrilling. "Who am I now?" For the first time in her life, the answer wasn't predetermined. And that, she was beginning to understand, was both the burden and the gift of freedom. The days slipped into a rhythm that was foreign to Nara's experience. Without the rigid ceremonial schedule of the palace, time seemed more fluid, measured by natural cycles rather than chronomarkers. Mornings in the fields with Darren, learning the practicalities of agriculture. Afternoons with Rosie in Eliana's laboratory, tending to the miracle plants that could extract toxins from contaminated water. Evenings with all of them around the dinner table, listening to the twins recount their day's discoveries and adventures. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something within her began to shift. The constant awareness of failure that had shadowed her since the ceremony of continuance began to recede. In its place grew something tentative but undeniable, a sense of capability. She might be useless as a royal vessel, but her long fingers were indeed perfect for the delicate work of cross-pollinating Eliana's experimental plants. Her Zalith education, focused though it had been on diplomatic protocol and imperial history, had included enough biochemistry for her to understand the basics of the phytoremediation process. And her precise memory, honed through years of memorizing ceremonial procedures, allowed her to recall Eliana's research notes in detail. "You're good at this," Darren observed one evening as they reviewed the data from the latest batch of purification tests. "Better than me, that's for sure. Numbers were never my strong suit." "It is merely pattern recognition," Naira demurred, though his praise sent an unfamiliar warmth through her. "Don't sell yourself short," he countered. "You've got a knack for seeing connections I miss. Eliana would have appreciated that." The comparison to his brilliant wife should have felt presumptuous, even offensive. Instead, Naira found herself touched by what she recognized as the highest compliment Darren could offer. With the twins, too, she was finding unexpected connections. Micah, curious and analytical, bombarded her with questions about the Empire and her former life, questions she would once have found impertinent, but now answered with increasing openness. Rosie, intuitive and gentle, seemed to sense when Naira was struggling with a memory or emotion and would simply sit beside her, sometimes leaning against her in a way that conveyed comfort without words. One afternoon, about 3 months after her arrival, Naira was working alone in the laboratory when she heard a commotion outside, voices raised in alarm, the sound of a vehicle approaching at high speed. She stepped onto the porch to see a sleek transport bearing the insignia of the Zalith Diplomatic Corps landing in the yard. Darren and the twins were returning from the fields, their expressions a mixture of confusion and concern. Naira felt her heart stutter in her chest. They had found her. But why? The dead were not pursued in Zalith culture. Once discarded, one ceased to exist in the official record. The transport's hatch opened, and 3 figures emerged, 2 royal guards in formal battle dress and a civilian Zalith in the elaborate robes of the diplomatic service. Even at a distance, Naira recognized him, Ambassador Thravik, her father's most trusted political advisor. "Princess Naira Azarian," he called, his voice carrying the formal harmonics of court speech. "By the grace of Emperor Visage and the wisdom of the Council of Elders, we bring greetings and summons." Summons? Impossible. She was dead to the Empire. Unless... "What is happening?" Darren asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. The twins pressed close to his legs, their eyes wide at the sight of the elaborately dressed aliens. "I don't know," Naira admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "This is unprecedented." Gathering her composure, she stepped forward to meet the delegation, automatically falling into the formal posture of royal reception, spine straight, primary arms in position of receptive authority, secondary limbs in ceremonial neutrality. "Ambassador Thravik," she acknowledged, careful to use the neutral formal address, rather than the honorific that would imply her continued royal status. "Your presence is unexpected." The ambassador performed the abbreviated bow of diplomatic equality, a courtesy she had not anticipated. "Princess Naira, your father the Emperor sends his regards and requests your immediate return to the Imperial Palace." "I am no longer a princess," Naira stated, the words less painful than they once would have been. "The ceremony of continuance determined my unworthiness. My name has been struck from the royal archives." Ambassador Thravik had the grace to look discomfited. "Circumstances have evolved since your departure. Your Highness, the Emperor requests your presence to discuss matters of state that concern you directly." "What matters could possibly concern one who is dead to the Empire?" Naira demanded. anger rising unexpectedly. How dare they discard her like refuse, only to appear months later with vague talk of matters of state. The ambassador glanced uncomfortably at Darren and the children. "Perhaps we might speak privately, Your Highness. Whatever you have to say can be said before my—" Naira hesitated, searching for the right word. "My family," she finished, the term feeling both foreign and right on her tongue. If the ambassador was shocked by this designation, he concealed it well. "As you wish. The political situation in the empire has become unstable. Factions have formed within the Council of Elders. Your father's authority is being challenged for the first time in his reign." "And this concerns me how?" Naira asked, though she was beginning to see the shape of it. "Your situation has become a rallying point for those who question the traditional practices of the dynasty. Your cousin, Elder Zareth, has been particularly vocal, suggesting that the ceremony of continuance is an outdated tradition that discards valuable members of the royal line based on arbitrary criteria." Now, Naira understood. Her cousin had always been a progressive voice in the council, advocating for reform of the more archaic imperial traditions. He had also been her father's chief rival for influence among the younger generation of nobles. "So I have become a political symbol," she stated flatly. "A powerful one," Ambassador Thravik confirmed. "The princess unjustly exiled. Your return would serve multiple purposes, demonstrating your father's willingness to reconsider tradition while simultaneously removing you as a symbol for the opposition. By making me a symbol for the crown instead," Naira concluded. The ambassador inclined his head in acknowledgement. "The emperor offers full restoration of your titles and privileges. You would be welcome back with all honors due your station." Darren shifted beside her, and Naira could feel his tension without looking at him. The twins remained silent, but Rosie had pressed closer to Naira's side, one small hand finding hers and holding tight. "And if I refuse?" Naira asked, though she already knew the answer. Ambassador Thravik's expression hardened slightly. "The Emperor anticipates your cooperation in this matter of dynastic security. Princess Naira, your duty to the Empire has not changed." Duty. Always duty. The word that had defined her existence from birth. "I require time to consider," she said finally, falling back on diplomatic protocol to buy herself space to think. The ambassador frowned. "The situation is urgent, Your Highness. The Emperor expects—" "The Emperor discarded me like waste," Naira interrupted, a breach of protocol so severe that the royal guards tensed visibly. "He will grant me the courtesy of due consideration before I respond to his request." For a moment, she thought Ambassador Thravik might insist, but something in her stance, or perhaps the presence of witnesses, made him reconsider. "Very well. The delegation will remain on Agrava 9 for 3 planetary rotations. We trust that will be sufficient time for reflection." He performed another formal bow. "We shall return tomorrow to hear your response." With that, the Zalith delegation retreated to their transport and departed, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. "Well," Darren said finally, "that was unexpected." Naira turned to him, searching his expression for— what? Anger at this intrusion? Relief that she might be leaving? But his face showed only concern. For her. She realized with a start. "I need to think," she said, the calm in her voice belying the turmoil within. Darren nodded. "Take all the time you need. We'll be here." "We'll be here." Such a simple statement, yet it anchored her in the midst of sudden uncertainty. Naira retreated to the laboratory, finding comfort in the familiar space with its ordered equipment and thriving experimental plants. She moved among them mechanically, checking moisture levels and nutrient solutions, her mind racing with implications and possibilities. Return to the palace, reclaim her title and position, become, once again, Princess Naira Azarian of the Royal House of Zalith. 3 months ago, it would have seemed a miracle. Now, it felt like a regression, a return to a cage she hadn't fully recognized until she'd experienced freedom. Yet duty remained a powerful force. If civil conflict was brewing in the Empire, lives could be at stake. Her return might indeed help stabilize the political situation, preventing bloodshed and suffering. The door to the laboratory opened softly, and Darren entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Thought you might want some tea," he said, setting one beside her. "The kids are full of questions, but I told them you needed space." "Thank you." Naira accepted the mug, grateful for both the beverage and his consideration. Darren leaned against a workbench, watching her with those steady eyes that seemed to see more than she sometimes wished to reveal. "So," he said after a moment, "royalty coming to drag you back to the palace. Quite the plot twist." Despite everything, Naira found herself smiling at his understated humor. "Indeed. What will you do?" It was the same direct question he had asked the night they discussed identity on the porch. Simple words that cut through pretense to the heart of the matter. "I don't know," she admitted. "My duty to the Empire is clear. Yet, Darren agreed, as if that single word contained all necessary elaboration. They sat in companionable silence for a time, sipping their tea as the laboratory's environmental systems hummed softly in the background. "What would you do?" Naira asked finally. "If you were in my position?" Darren considered the question seriously. "Hard to say. Not being royalty or having an empire depending on me." He set his mug down carefully. "But I think I'd ask myself what I actually wanted, separate from what others expect. Then I'd ask whether doing my duty would actually help anyone, or just maintain a system that was willing to throw me away when I didn't meet its standards. Put that way, the choice seemed clearer. Yet still, she hesitated. "The Empire is all I've ever known," she said softly. "Even here, even now, part of me is still defined by it." "Makes sense." Darren's voice was gentle. "We're all shaped by where we come from. Doesn't mean we're bound by it forever." Another silence fell between them, but this one felt different, expectant, as if a decision was forming in the quiet. "If I stay," Naira said finally, the words emerging before she'd fully processed the thought, "would that be acceptable to you and the children?" Darren's expression softened in a way that made her heart beat faster. "More than acceptable," he said quietly. "But this has to be your choice, Naira. Not made out of fear or obligation or gratitude. If you want to go back and be a princess again, we'll understand. And if I want to stay and be whatever I am becoming here, then we'd be honored," he said simply. "The kids adore you, and He paused, seeming to search for words. "I've come to value your presence more than I expected." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither seemed ready to articulate fully. "I need to sleep on this decision," Naira said finally. "But thank you, Darren, for everything." He nodded, understanding as always. "Good night, Naira. Whatever you decide, we're with you." As he left, Naira remained in the laboratory, surrounded by the plants that represented Eliana's legacy and, increasingly, her own contribution to this unexpected life. In the soft glow of the monitoring systems, she confronted the choice before her, not just between the Empire and the farm, but between the person she had been raised to be and the person she was discovering she could become. That night, her sleep was troubled by dreams of the palace, its crystalline spires and formal gardens, the elaborate ceremonies and rigid protocols. In the dreams, she moved through familiar corridors but found herself increasingly lost, the architecture shifting around her until she was running, desperate to find an exit from the beautiful labyrinth. She woke with the first light of Agrava 9's twin suns, her decision clear in a way it hadn't been the night before. Whatever came next, She could not return to the cage, no matter how gilded. Nara found Darren already awake, preparing the morning meal in the kitchen. The twins were still asleep, their energy temporarily subdued by the natural rhythms of childhood. "I've made my decision," she said without preamble. Darren looked up from his task, his expression carefully neutral. "And? I will not return to the Empire." The words felt both terrifying and liberating. "My place is here now. If you'll have me." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, breaking over the eastern fields. "We'll have you," he said simply. Then, with a hint of mischief, "Though I'm not sure the kids will let you go anyway. Rosie's already planning to show you how to make flower crowns today." Nara felt an answering smile tugging at her lips. "A different sort of crown than I'm accustomed to." "Probably more comfortable," Darren observed, returning to his breakfast preparations. Just then, the twins burst into the kitchen, their energy seemingly recharged overnight. "Are you staying?" Rosie demanded without preamble, fixing Nara with an intense stare. "Daddy said we shouldn't ask, but I need to know." Nara knelt to meet the child's eyes. "Yes, Rosie, I'm staying." The girl's face lit up with joy, and she threw her arms around Nara's neck, a gesture of physical affection that would have been unthinkable in the palace, but which Nara now returned without hesitation. "Good," Micah declared, trying to sound casual but unable to hide his relief. "Because we need you for the science fair project. Nobody else knows how to make the plants glow in the dark." Darren raised an eyebrow at this. "Glow-in-the-dark plants? That's the first I'm hearing of this plan." Micah shot Nara a conspiratorial look. "It was supposed to be a surprise." "And it still can be," Nara assured him, rising to her feet with Rosie still clinging to her side. "We have plenty of time." Time. The concept had new meaning now. Not a resource to be optimized for duty, but a gift to be savored for its own sake. After breakfast, Naira helped the twins with their morning chores, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple tasks of feeding the farm's small complement of animals and checking the seedlings in the greenhouse. Later, they would need to prepare for the arrival of the imperial delegation. But for now, she allowed herself to be fully present in this life she had chosen. Midday brought the expected return of Ambassador Thravik and his entourage. This time, Nara received them in the yard, with Darren and the twins standing supportively behind her. She had abandoned the formal posture of royal reception, standing instead with the relaxed confidence of someone comfortable in her own skin. "Princess Nara," the ambassador began, "have you reached a decision regarding the Emperor's summons?" "I have," she replied calmly. "Please convey to my father, Emperor Visage, that I decline to return to the imperial palace at this time." Ambassador Thravik's expression hardened. "Perhaps you misunderstood the nature of the Emperor's request. Your Highness, this is not an invitation that can be declined. The stability of the Empire is not my responsibility," Naira interrupted firmly. "The ceremony of continuance determined my unfitness for imperial duty. That judgment cannot be selectively reversed for political convenience." "This is unprecedented," the ambassador sputtered. "The Emperor will be most displeased." "The Emperor discarded me," Nara reminded him, her voice steady. "He cannot now reclaim me simply because I have become politically useful. I am no longer a princess of the royal house. I am simply Nara, resident of Agrava 9. Ambassador Thravik's eyes narrowed. "You would choose exile among aliens over your rightful place in the imperial court? Over your duty to your people?" "I choose freedom over subjugation," Nara replied. "I choose a life where my worth is not determined by my reproductive capacity. I choose these people." She gestured to Darren and the twins, who saw value in me when the Empire saw only failure. The ambassador's secondary limbs twitched in agitation, a breach of diplomatic composure that revealed his distress. "This is most irregular. Your High Ms. Azarian. The Emperor anticipated your cooperation. Then the Emperor does not know me as well as he believes, Nera said softly. Please convey my respect to my father. But my decision is final. I will not be returning to the palace. For a moment, it seemed Ambassador Thravik might argue further, but diplomatic training reasserted itself. He performed a stiff bow, the formal acknowledgement of an impasse. I shall convey your response to the Emperor, he said coldly, though I caution you to consider the consequences of your decision. The Empire has a long memory. As do I, Naira replied, maintaining her composure, though her hearts raced with the audacity of her defiance. Safe journey, Ambassador. With visible reluctance, the Imperial delegation departed, their sleek transport disappearing into the Agravan sky with far more haste than diplomatic protocol would normally dictate. Only when they were completely out of sight did Nera allow her posture to relax, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Well, Darren said, coming to stand beside her. That was impressively royal for someone who claims not to be a princess anymore. Nera turned to him, surprised to find herself smiling despite the tension of the encounter. Old habits, she admitted. You were amazing, Micah declared, his eyes wide with admiration. You just told the whole Empire to buzz off. I wouldn't put it quite that way, Nera demurred, though the boy's assessment wasn't entirely inaccurate. Will they come back? Rosie asked, her expression concerned. Will they try to make you go with them? Naira considered the question seriously. I don't believe so. The Empire does not waste resources on lost causes. They will find another solution to their political problem. And if they don't? Darren asked quietly. After the twins had run off to resume their interrupted play. Then we will face that challenge when it comes, Nera replied, surprising herself with the ease of the we. But I think my father will recognize the futility of further attempts. He is many things, but inefficient is not one of them. Darren nodded, accepting her assessment. So, he said after a moment, now that you've officially told an empire to buzz off, what's next for the former princess of the Zalith dynasty? Nera looked out over the fields, stretching toward the horizon, their reddish-green expanse both alien and increasingly familiar. I'm not entirely sure, she admitted. I've never had a future that wasn't predetermined. Sounds like an adventure, Darren observed, his voice warm. Indeed. She turned to meet his gaze, finding comfort in the steady acceptance she saw there. One I look forward to discovering. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm, unmarked by the shadow of imperial recall. Naira threw herself into the life of the farm with renewed commitment, expanding her work with Eliana's experimental plants and taking on greater responsibility for the daily operations that kept the enterprise functioning. The twins, secure in the knowledge that she was staying permanently, integrated her fully into their lives. Rosie taught her to make flower crowns from the hardy blooms that grew along the irrigation channels, while Micah enlisted her help with increasingly ambitious science projects. Family meals became a time of shared stories and plans for the future, a concept that Nera was slowly learning to embrace. It was during one such meal, nearly 2 months after the Imperial delegation's departure, that Nera first noticed the symptoms. A slight discomfort in her abdomen, similar to but distinct from the lingering effects of the ceremonial extraction. Increased thirst, even beyond her species' normal requirements. Sensitivity to the Agravan sunlight that hadn't troubled her before. She dismissed these changes at first, attributing them to the ongoing adjustments of her body to the planet's environment. But when the symptoms persisted for several cycles, she reluctantly mentioned them to Darren. His concern was immediate. We should have Dr. Peterson take a look at you, he said, referring to the colony's primary physician. He doesn't have much experience with Zalith physiology, but he's got access to the xenobiology database. Better safe than sorry. The medical center in the colony's main settlement was small, but well equipped, maintained as much for research purposes as for the health needs of the scattered human population. Dr. Peterson, a lanky man with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes, greeted them with professional curiosity. "A Zalith patient! That's a first for me," he admitted, as he prepared his diagnostic equipment. "I've studied the literature, of course, but there's nothing like practical experience." Nara submitted to his examination with the stoicism expected of her former station, describing her symptoms with clinical precision. Darren remained at her side, his presence a comfort she hadn't realized she needed until she found herself reaching for his hand during a particularly uncomfortable scan. Dr. Peterson's expression grew increasingly puzzled as the examination proceeded. He ran several tests twice, consulting his database between repetitions. "Is something wrong?" Darren asked, his concern evident. "Not wrong, exactly," the doctor replied carefully. "Just unexpected." He turned to Nara. "Ms. Azarian, according to my readings and the xenobiology database, you appear to be pregnant." The word hung in the air, impossible and incomprehensible. "That is not possible," Nara stated flatly. "The ceremony of continuance determined my reproductive incapacity. That is why I was discarded from the royal line." Dr. Peterson frowned, consulting his data again. "I understand that's what you were told, but these readings are quite clear. You're carrying embryonic life, consistent with early-stage Zalith development." "But how?" Darren asked, his expression a mixture of confusion and something else Nara couldn't quite identify. The doctor shrugged. "I'm not an expert in Zalith reproduction, but the database indicates they're sequential hermaphrodites under certain conditions, primarily female in their base state, but capable of producing male gametes when isolated from other members of their species." He glanced between them, understanding dawning. "It appears that Ms. Azarian's biology has adapted to her circumstances." "You're saying," Darren began, then stopped, seemingly unable to complete the thought. "I'm saying," Dr. Peterson continued gently, "that you two appear to have conceived a child together. The embryo shows hybrid characteristics, primarily Zalith in structure, but with definite human genetic markers." Nara felt as if the floor beneath her had suddenly vanished. Pregnant, carrying a child that was both Zalith and human. A biological impossibility that had somehow become reality. "How?" she whispered. "The royal geneticists declared me incapable of reproduction." Dr. Peterson's expression softened with understanding. "If I may speak frankly, Ms. Azarian, royal geneticists might have political motivations that supersede biological accuracy. Based on these readings, there's nothing inherently wrong with your reproductive system. It simply may not have been compatible with whatever royal genetic material they were attempting to use." The implications were staggering. Had she been discarded based on a lie, or merely an imperial definition of reproductive success that valued dynasty over biology? "Is the child healthy?" Darren asked, his voice steady despite the shock evident in his eyes. Dr. Peterson nodded. "As far as I can determine, yes. This is uncharted territory. Of course, there are no records of Zalith-human hybrids, but all developmental markers appear normal for this stage." Nara placed a hand over her abdomen, trying to reconcile this new reality with everything she had been told about herself. "I was deemed worthless because I could not continue the royal line," she said softly. And now you're continuing a different line altogether," Darren finished, his hand coming to rest gently over hers. If that's what you want." The question in his voice brought Nara back to the present moment, to the implications, not just for her identity, but for their relationship, a connection that had been growing deeper over the months, but which neither had defined explicitly. She began, then paused, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation. Dr. Peterson cleared his throat. I'll give you two some privacy to discuss this, he said tactfully, moving toward the door. Take all the time you need. I'll be in my office when you're ready to talk about next steps. When they were alone, Nara turned to Darren, searching his face for what? Rejection? Acceptance? Fear? What she found was a complex mixture of emotion. Surprise, certainly, but also a tentative joy and, most reassuringly, the same steady presence that had been her anchor since the day he'd found her in the abandoned cargo hold. This is unexpected, he said finally. The understatement, so typical of him, that Nara felt a surge of affection despite the turmoil of her emotions. Indeed, she agreed, finding refuge in his calm. How do you feel about it? Darren asked, his focus entirely on her well-being. How did she feel? The question was deceptively simple, yet profoundly complex. In the palace, her feelings about reproduction would have been irrelevant. Royal duty superseded personal preference. Her body was a vessel for dynastic continuity. Nothing more. But here, now, with Darren's hand warm over hers and the incredible knowledge that new life grew within her, life created not from duty, but from something far more profound. Her feelings were suddenly central to the situation. I feel, she began, then stopped, searching for words adequate to the moment. I feel as if the universe has a strange sense of irony. A small laugh escaped her, surprising them both. I was discarded for being barren, only to discover that I merely required the right genetic partner. Darren's expression softened further. And the child itself, how do you feel about becoming a mother? Mother, another identity she had never expected to claim. Princess, exile, farmer, scientist. These transitions had been challenging enough. But mother. Yet as she considered the concept, Naira found not fear, but a growing sense of wonder. This child, this impossible, miraculous hybrid, represented everything her life had become. A fusion of worlds, a defiance of limitations, a triumph of connection over isolation. I want this child, she said, the certainty in her voice surprising even herself. If you... Yes, Darren said simply, before she could even complete the question. Yes, I want this too. His eyes met hers, open and vulnerable in a way she had rarely seen. I want you, Nara, both of you, if that's what you want. The directness of his declaration, so human, so free of the elaborate verbal rituals of her former life, touched something deep within her. In the Empire, unions were strategic alliances, carefully negotiated for maximum political or genetic advantage. Love was considered a primitive emotion, unnecessary for the efficient functioning of society. Yet here was Darren, offering not alliance but partnership, not advantage but shared joy, not duty but love. It is what I want, she replied, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. You, the children, this farm, this life we're building. All of it. The smile that spread across his face was like dawn, breaking over the eastern fields, warm and bright and full of promise. He leaned forward, hesitant at first but encouraged by her response, and kissed her gently. It was their first kiss, an act that would have been considered shockingly intimate in imperial society, where physical contact was strictly regulated. But like so many things in her new life, Nara found the experience not shocking, but liberating, a physical expression of the connection that had been growing between them for months. When they finally returned to Dr. Peterson's office, it was with clasped hands and shared purpose. The doctor provided what information he could about the unprecedented pregnancy, scheduling regular monitoring sessions and promising to consult with xenobiology specialists at the Sector Medical Center. As they drove back to the farm in Darren's vehicle, Nara found herself filled with a strange, buoyant energy. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the landscape, transforming the familiar terrain into something newly beautiful. "How will we tell the twins?" she asked suddenly, the practical question breaking through her contemplation. Darren considered for a moment. "Honestly, I think they're old enough to understand the basics, and they already adore you. I suspect they'll be thrilled at the idea of a new sibling, even an unusual one." Sibling, family. The concepts continued to expand and reshape themselves in Nara's mind, taking on new dimensions with each development in her life. "And if the Empire returns?" she asked, voicing the concern that had lurked at the edges of her consciousness since the ambassador's departure. "If they learn of this child?" Darren's expression grew serious. "Then we'll face that together. But I suspect a half-human, half-Zalith child isn't what they have in mind for the royal lineage. This might actually make them less interested in reclaiming you, not more." There was wisdom in his assessment. The imperial obsession with genetic purity would make a hybrid child anathema rather than asset. Still, Nara found herself instinctively protective of the new life within her, a life that represented defiance of everything the Empire had declared impossible. That evening, they gathered the twins in the main room of the farmhouse, creating a moment of ceremony that felt appropriate to the significance of their news. "We have something important to tell you," Darren began, his tone serious but warm. The children, sensing the weight of the moment, sat attentively, their eyes moving between Darren and Nara with curious anticipation. "Nara and I are going to have a baby together," Darren continued, his voice steady. "Which means you two will have a new brother or sister." There was a moment of silence as the twins processed this information, their expressions transitioning from surprise to consideration to excitement. "Really?" Rosie was the first to respond, her face lighting up. "A baby that's part Zalith like Nara and part human like us." "That's right," Naira confirmed, touched by the child's immediate acceptance of the concept. "The baby will be something new, a little bit of both worlds." "Will it have scales?" Micah asked, practical as always. "And how many arms will it have? 2 like us or 4 like you?" These were questions to which Nara had no answers, but she appreciated the boy's straightforward curiosity. "We don't know yet," she admitted. "This kind of baby has never existed before. We'll discover these things together as the baby grows." "Cool," Micah declared, apparently satisfied with this response. "It's like a science experiment, but with a baby." "Not exactly," Darren corrected gently. "The baby is a person, not an experiment. But you're right that we'll be learning new things as we go." "Will you get married?" Rosie asked suddenly, fixing them with a serious stare. "Mom and Dad were married when they had us." Darren and Nara exchanged glances, caught off guard by the question. It was something they hadn't discussed in the whirlwind of the day's revelations. "We haven't decided about that yet," Darren answered honestly. "But what matters most is that we care about each other and will both love the baby, just like we love you two." This seemed to satisfy Rosie, who nodded solemnly before breaking into a wide smile. "I'm going to be a big sister," she exclaimed, the full impact of the news finally hitting her. "I can show the baby all the important things, like where the best flowers grow and how to make Dad smile when he's being serious." The conversation flowed naturally from there, with the twins offering increasingly imaginative suggestions for names and speculating about what features the baby might inherit from each parent. Their acceptance, immediate and unconditional, was yet another reminder to Nara of how different this family was from the one she had been born into. Later that night, after the twins were asleep, Nara and Darren sat together on the porch, watching the 3 moons of Agrava 9 trace their paths across the star-filled sky. The night was cool, but not uncomfortable. The silence between them companionable. "We should talk about what Rosie asked," Darren said finally, his voice quiet in the darkness. "About marriage." Nara had been expecting this conversation, had been considering her response since the moment the child had raised the question. In the empire, marriage was a political alliance, a contract between families rather than individuals. The concept of marriage for love was considered primitive, a relic of less evolved societies. Yet, as with so many imperial doctrines, Nera found her perspective shifting the longer she lived away from its influence. "In my culture," she began carefully, "joining ceremonies are matters of dynastic strategy. Genetic compatibility and political advantage are the only relevant factors." "And in human culture?" Darren prompted gently. "I am learning that human marriages can be many things," Nera replied. "But, at their best, they seem to be partnerships based on mutual choice and affection." "Love," Darren corrected softly. "The word you're looking for is love." Love. Another concept the Empire dismissed as primitive, unnecessary for the efficient functioning of society, a chemical reaction to be controlled rather than celebrated. "Yes," Nera acknowledged, "love." Darren turned to face her, his expression visible in the silvery light of the moons. "Do you think you could love me, Nera? Not just as the father of your child or the man who found you in that cargo hold, but as a partner for life?" The directness of the question was so quintessentially Darren. No elaborate preamble, no diplomatic evasion, just the heart of the matter laid bare. And in that moment, looking at this human who had shown her more genuine care and respect than anyone in her 28 cycles of life, Naira realized that the answer was both simple and profound. "I already do," she said quietly. "I love you, Darren Holt, and I love your children, and I love this life we are building together. It is not what I was raised to expect or value, but it has become more precious to me than anything in the 12 systems of the Empire." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, breaking over the eastern fields, warm and bright and full of promise. He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become comfortingly familiar. "Then, we should get married," he said simply. "Not because the twins expect it or because of the baby, but because we choose each other." Choice. The concept that had seemed so foreign when he first offered his hand in the abandoned cargo hold had become the cornerstone of her new life. The freedom to choose, her home, her work, her family, her love, was the greatest gift Darren had given her, greater even than the rescue itself. "Yes," Nara agreed, the single syllable containing worlds of meaning. "We should." As if in response to this decision, she felt a subtle flutter within her abdomen, too early to be the movement of the child, yet perfectly timed to mark the moment. Her hand moved instinctively to the spot, and Darren's followed, resting gently over the place where their impossible, miraculous child grew. In that quiet moment under the Agravan moons, Nara Azarian, once princess, now simply herself, found a peace she had never known in the crystal spires of the imperial palace. Here, with Darren's hand warm over hers and the knowledge of new life growing within her, she was not defined by function or failure, by bloodline or biology. She was defined by love, by choice, by the freedom to become whoever she wished to be. The Empire had discarded her like trash for being infertile. Now, she was building a family with a human farmer on a distant colony world, creating a life that defied imperial definitions of value and worth. And in that defiance, she had found something the Empire, for all its power and protocol, could never provide: the simple, profound joy of belonging, not because of duty or bloodline, but because of love freely given and received. "You are not what others judge you to be," she thought, her hand still resting over the new life within her. "You are what you choose to become."